Today, we're going to dive deep into one of the most catastrophic economic events in modern history, the Great Depression. We're going to explore how a decade of, roaring prosperity could just completely unravel into a decade of unparalleled despair, and what its chilling legacy means for all of us today. Seriously, just picture it. This wasn't some nightmare. For millions of people, this was the stark, terrifying reality that dawned in the autumn of 1929. It was like a financial earthquake had just struck, and the aftershocks were about to reshape the entire world. So the question is, how did it all go so wrong? To really understand the collapse, we first have to understand the towering height from which the economy fell. See, the decade leading up to the crash wasn't just stable, it was absolutely electric. The Roaring '20s. It was an era of jazz, flappers, and what felt like just boundless optimism. You had new technologies like the automobile and the radio changing everything about daily life. The stock market seemed like a one-way ticket to getting rich, and it really felt like the party would never, ever end. But underneath that glittering surface, the foundation was already starting to crack. The danger was really hiding in plain sight. People weren't just investing. A lot of them were basically gambling, buying stocks with borrowed money, a thing called buying on margin. At the same time, banks, with almost zero federal oversight, were lending out money like crazy for these super risky ventures. And while the rich got richer, the gap between them and everyone else was soaring. By the summer of 1929, people were already buying less. The economic engine was sputtering, even if the party on Wall Street was just too loud for anyone to notice. And then, in October 1929, the party came to a sudden, violent end. That illusion of perpetual growth, it shattered in just a matter of days. Now here's a common misconception. A lot of people think the Wall Street crash caused the Great Depression. The truth is, it's a bit more complex. Only about 2% of Americans even owned stock back then. The real damage was psychological. It was like the gunshot that started an avalanche, just completely shattering the nation's confidence and its belief that the good times would last forever. The collapse was shockingly fast. It all went down in one terrifying week. On Black Thursday, the market plunged the second the opening bell rang. There was a little rally that gave some false hope, but then came Black Monday, when the floor just completely gave out. The next day, Black Tuesday, that was pure chaos. 16 million shares were dumped, a trading record that stood for almost 40 years. Fortunes that took a decade to build were just wiped out. And the slide didn't stop there. Not even close. Over the next 3 years, the stock market just continued to bleed out, eventually losing a staggering 85% of its value from its peak in 1929. The nation's financial heart had basically stopped beating. But this wasn't just an American problem. The fire that started on Wall Street quickly jumped borders and oceans. It set off a chain reaction that would pull the entire world into an economic vortex. So how did a crisis in America become a global catastrophe? Well, it boils down to 3 key things. First, as we're about to see, the banking system just crumbled. Second, international trade seized up completely. And third, a rigid money system called the gold standard basically spread the pain everywhere. See, most currencies were tied to gold, which meant countries couldn't easily adjust their own money supply to fight the downturn. They were basically chained to the American crisis. That panic on Wall Street, it quickly spread to Main Street. People lost faith in the banks and literally rushed to pull their cash out. The problem was, the banks didn't have it. It had all been loaned out or lost in the crash. These bank runs created this devastating domino effect. By 1933, over 9,000 banks had failed, wiping out the life savings of millions of families. Just gone. Then, in a desperate attempt to protect American jobs, Congress made a fatal error. The Smoot-Hawley Tariff Act dramatically raised taxes on imported goods. The idea was to make American products cheaper, but other countries didn't just take it. They fought back with their own tariffs on American goods. So instead of protecting the economy, it strangled global trade, which fell by more than half. It was like trying to put out a fire with gasoline. The devastation was global, and these numbers, they're just staggering. Industrial production in the US and Germany was nearly cut in half. Foreign trade collapsed across the board, and unemployment skyrocketed. I mean, look at the US. It shot up by over 600%. this wasn't just an American crisis anymore. It was a shared worldwide nightmare. Behind all these staggering statistics are millions of individual stories of hardship, of loss. The Great Depression wasn't just an economic event. It was a human tragedy on a massive, massive scale. The scale of the suffering is, well, it's hard to even comprehend. At its absolute worst, in 1933, the national unemployment rate hit an unbelievable 25%. The average family's income had been slashed by 40% from what it was just 4 years earlier. And farmers, they were hit the hardest of all, with crop prices collapsing by 60%, leaving them with no way to pay their debts. Just think about that for a second. 1/4 of the entire workforce was jobless. People who once had stable jobs, who had homes, were now standing in lines for hours just for a bowl of soup and a piece of bread. These shanty towns, which people mockingly called Hoovervilles, sprang up all over the country as families lost their homes. The silence of closed factories became the new soundtrack of the nation. And as if the economic crisis wasn't enough, nature delivered a second devastating blow. Years of unsustainable farming had stripped away the topsoil from the Great Plains. So when a severe drought hit, all that soil just turned to dust. Massive dark clouds of dust, people called them black blizzards, buried farms and homes. It was a man-made ecological disaster that forced hundreds of thousands of desperate families to just abandon their land and head west. So, how did the country respond to this unprecedented crisis? Well, the answer would fundamentally redefine the role of government in American life and leave a legacy that we're still living with today. The crisis really unfolded across 2 presidencies with totally different ideas about how to fix things. President Herbert Hoover at first believed in rugged individualism, hoping that private charities and businesses would just sort the problem out. His actions were seen as way too little, way too late. So in 1932, America voted for a change, electing Franklin D. Roosevelt, who promised a complete overhaul, a new deal for the American people. The New Deal was this alphabet soup of government programs, a whirlwind of action unlike anything the country had ever seen. It put people to work building dams and bridges and parks. It created things like the FDIC to ensure bank deposits, which helped restore faith in the financial system. It regulated the stock market to prevent another crash and gave direct aid to the unemployed and to farmers. It was a radical experiment, really, designed to pull the nation back from the brink. But even with the New Deal, the economy struggled for years. So what finally brought that decade of hardship to a close? The answer wasn't a government program, but a global conflict. It was the massive industrial mobilization for World War II that finally put every American back to work, ending the Great Depression for good. In the end, the Great Depression was so much more than a line on a historical chart. It was seared into the national memory. It led to lasting reforms we still have today, like Social Security and the FDIC, safety nets that continue to shape our economy. It fundamentally changed our relationship with government and what we expect from it in a crisis. And above all, it serves as a permanent, chilling reminder of how quickly prosperity can vanish and just how fragile our economic systems can really be.